Today on the Perception and Action podcast, my interview with Alex Sarama, founder of Transforming Basketball, taking a constraints-led approach to basketball practice. So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Now on to the show. All right, today it's my pleasure to be joined by Alex Sarama from Transforming Basketball. Doing a lot of really interesting things. We'll get into each of them as we go along, but let's just dive right in. Alex, thanks for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Rob, it's a pleasure to be here. You've been such a huge inspiration for me. So really grateful for everything you share, and really excited for the conversation we'll have today.
Oh, thank you. So can you give us a little bit about your background? Obviously, basketball is your sport. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started and things like that?
Absolutely. So I'm from the UK originally, so I wouldn't exactly say a hotbed of hoops. Mm-hmm. So I grew up playing a lot of different sports. My dad was actually a tennis coach, but I played tennis, soccer, and basketball growing up. And then from a very young age, I loved the game. And I think growing up in the UK, it was a unique form of life because it made me even more passionate. Friends would kind of be like asking, why am I playing basketball? And it just made me even more resolute to love the game and hopefully have a career in it. And I figured early on I wouldn't have a career in playing. So I thought coaching was the next best thing. So I actually started I started coaching when I was 15, and that was the unique thing in the UK because basketball was so underdeveloped at the time. I had lots of affordances to coach. I started coaching the younger kids at my school, and then I actually started my own club when I was 16 years old. So I'd say at the time, Rob, I was very games-based. Mm-hmm. I didn't really align with drills just because I related it to my personal playing experiences, but it was a combination of drills and just some kind of very generic small-sided games I used. Okay. And I kind of stayed, my journey as a coach was I coached in that way for about 8 years. And then, I'm 28 now, so it was about 5 years ago I really came across ecological dynamics and more specifically the constraints-led approach. And I studied history at university, but I really just self-studied all of it. Your podcast was a huge part of that. Going through all the research papers, I reached out to, some of the professors, researchers in the space. And I've just been committed to practically applying this in basketball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Over the last 5 years, really coaching loads of different levels, and that's helped a lot.
Cool. Yeah. So you for a while, you were affiliated with Basketball Immersion. Is that the group you're
correct? Exactly.
Yeah, which is, yep. I think we talked about, is primarily a games-based approach, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Great 3 years. It was great for me just to connect, because I think that period with Immersion and Chris really helped me understand kind of where coaches were at, but also the barriers that maybe exist in going, not just from drill-based to games-based, but game-based to CLA, and really understanding that. So that was a really useful time period for me. And I should say, I've been, this year I was working with the Portland Trailblazers and their G League team, kind of trying to embed these ideas in an NBA setting. And then I'm also working in London Lions in an academy. Cool. So I was kind of back and forth between both. And then it was my 3 years in Italy before this where I really learned, because I had the full reins to do this in an academy where we went all in, not just on the court, but in using CLA for performance analysis, scouting, athletic performance, physical therapy. So all these different fields. And that was what really allowed me to develop a lot of the practical solutions I'm using today.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this when I was on your podcast, that the games-based has some similarities with ecological approach, but it is fundamentally different, right? I think what it's trying to achieve, more cognitive understanding in the player and things like that. So it is fundamentally different. So did you kind of have an aha moment with using the games-based approach and you wanted to take it a bit further, or you just discovered something that was maybe a better fit for what you were doing?
Yeah, I did. I think it was probably an aha moment. I think for me, it was understanding the why behind how we're actually using constraints. And that to me is in relation to principles of play in a team sport and identifying, diagnosing rate limiters, factors shrinking the affordances landscape. So at the start, because I didn't really have principles of play identified, I was more traditional in the sense of these game models. We see that a lot in soccer, but it was the same in basketball with kind of motion offenses and set plays.
Yeah.
As soon as I developed kind of ecologically informed principles of play, the CLA came and I was able to use it far more intentionally and specifically. So I think in basketball, it's kind of how can we develop principles of play based on a framework of shared affordances? And for me, the easiest way is looking at triggers, which are just actions. So it could be something like a pick and roll where you go and set a pick, but instead of scripting this very elaborate pattern, and you see this all the time, even at the highest level, where players are missing out on very attractive affordances, which would easily create an advantage because the coach has told them to run this set play and they just don't see what else is going on, within that possession. So scrapping all of that and being very intentional with principles of play and how you can bring them to life, what your principles are, I think that's a key part of it. And the second would be rate limiters. And I think that allows your use of the CLA to go up a whole level when you're actually thinking specifically about each player and using co-design to identify rate limiters with them, and then actually speaking, with other practitioners. If you're in a professional sports organization, actually using your whole staff to design a player development plan and get them all identifying rate limiters. For me, I've always said that's the easiest practical step for organizations to move away from this siloed approach that dominates, I'd say, North American professional sports, and just having those conversations and having, a strength coach, sports specific coach, medical coach, whatever it is, just identifying these rate limiters and working together to solve them, like on the field, on the court, whatever it is. I think that's kind of the best steps to go about it.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. There's a bunch of things there. I last year my stepson started playing basketball, and the coach mostly, I love what he does, but he was trying to put new plays in and tell you go here, you go there with no defense. And the kids could not remember or understand where to be because there was no affordances there, right? They didn't know why would I set a pick here? So it was kind of proof in the pudding. But rate limiters, so that's something that I've talked a bit, I haven't dived into. So rate limiters, are those mostly are you thinking mostly in terms of capacity?
I think it could be both.
Or a skill, like a skill level.
Perceiving the affordance and the actionability of it. And I think this is where it's so specific on each scenario. And I think too, Rob, the biggest thing in a lot of sports is, I think one of the biggest advantages of an ecological lens is just specificity, and the way you see the game changes. So often when I speak with basketball coaches and maybe we start trying to design a player development plan for some of their players, it's very general. And this isn't a knock on anyone because coaches are really well intentioned, but it's what we'd often see is something like, oh, they've got to become a better shooter, a better defender. They need to pass the ball better. And it's just, what vague. Does that mean?
Yeah, too vague. Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything. So if we can start to actually think, all right, what within maybe an offense, within the teams, within the context of the defense, what affordances are they encountering that if we maybe increase their ability to navigate, an affordance landscape in a particular setting, in one area of the offense, in one location of the court, whatever it is, that might have a big impact on the team. So it's just like prioritizing the rate limiters and having them really, really specific. So I'll give you an example. There's actually one player this year who was struggling with rebounding the basketball. And the solution kind of that before kind of coaches were doing was just like throwing the ball off the glass, like chucking it and just rebounding and going up kind of 1-on-0, so no defense. And so with an ecological hat, I just watched his possessions and I was noticing that he wasn't actually attuning to the flight of the ball. So even many instances, a teammate would shoot the ball and he even had his head turned and he was like 2 seconds late, even seeing the ball flying and then landing off the rim. And then secondly, another rate limiter would be his positioning. He was always finding himself in suboptimal positions. He was like under the basket. So obviously when the ball came off the ring, he was just in no position to rebound the ball. So, I created some activities to solve this where there would be myself and other coaches just moving in very random ways, playing offense, and sometimes he would play with us. And I'd always have an opponent who was basically tracking him. And then at a completely random time, one of us would shoot the ball, and he would try track it, rebound, and finish one-on-one. And, then I manipulated constraints additionally based on what I was seeing. And then kind of the final part would be I'd speak maybe with the strength coach, and it could be something related to action capabilities in terms of he struggled kind of when he was in contact, kind of like hinging with an opponent. He really struggled to create space and push them out the way. So that then you could devise an integrated approach. So that would just be a really specific example. Hopefully that helps.
I think that's an important point, looking at it as a whole. Often we just, we want to focus on some simple physical thing, right? He doesn't jump high enough, but instead of looking at it as a whole skill where you're picking up information about the affordance about other players, where the ball is coming, in the moment too. I think that the example of how you're training it, he has to decide where to position himself and where to go to get the ball in the moment, because it's not completely predictable drill where it's happening the same time over and over.
And gradually too, Rob, like the affordance for him to actually go rebound would be diminished. So hidden scoring, I could actually link in other rate limiters to the same activity. So for instance, he struggled catching off when he was rolling at speed or cutting to the rim. So what I like to do a lot is just design multiple activities in one. And it's just common sense, because as they become more, if we really want to see if the intervention we've designed is making an impact, obviously it can't appear every repetition. And then I think too, just being so intentional with everything else we do, like when we're just watching video with a player or performance analysis, like we're seeing in a lot of sports, it should all be linked to that. So for instance, if I'm doing an activity based on that, his whole intent, like we should be educating intention that whole week based on like one theme, and just showing him clips and just asking him questions. And unfortunately, what we see a lot would be the athletes would be distracted. And what I see in basketball is kind of scattered clips being shown, or just other things which have no correlation to actually what they need to work on at one, period or month, whatever.
Yeah, I found that too with the teams. That you have a video session that's so far removed from practice. They're watching stuff and it's not a lot of focus, and then it kind of gets lost between watching it in the court.
That's exactly.
No, I think that's also a great, I think, of like a task simplification. Like you don't have to practice rebound in the context of 5-on-5 full game, right? You can take it out but just make sure that the key pieces are all you're getting them enough more reps than they would normally get in a game but they're doing a real shot against a real, just taking a piece of it. Yeah, I think that's a great example. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, go ahead. So
no, I was going to say too, I think just from everything I've learned this year, you did a podcast a few weeks ago about the role of a skill act specialist. I've spoken with Sean Mishra a lot about this too, and I just think it's just that example. It's a great example. I think it's a good example of how practically you could do this in any kind of setting. I think if you have a skill act specialist there, just the advantage of even just, I often thought this here in Portland, how amazing it would be to have someone like yourself or Sean actually there involved, helping me design these learning environments, and just what an advantage that is. And I think too, Rob, it's practically just organizing this. It's really complex because, I've spoken about this for one player, and I think it's actually quite a lot of intentionality and effort you need to do. So, and then, let alone a basketball team, you've got 12 players, if not more. So I just think it would be, I really believe that kind of everything you guys are speaking about, I do think it's the direction of our sport, and it is going to go there, but it's just, we've got so many things to overcome. And that's obviously where hopefully the more we share these practical examples, coaches will understand what it looks like.
Yeah, I think so. And I also like from your example, you can see how interconnected everything is, right? So you're identifying the rate limiters using analytics, probably soon, maybe using the biomechanics that's coming to the NBA, right?
Yes.
You're taking it to the coaches, taking it to the S&C, all these things that used to be separate, got to all come together to work on this problem. Yeah.
That's exactly it. And it's interesting you mentioned the analytics side, because that's obviously something huge in the NBA. And I found that to be a good way to maybe get buy-in, especially from a front office. Something I actually started doing was statting the statting the workout. So I just go back, watch the video, even in the 12-minute PDP, and sure enough, you can imagine the success rate of finishes. I remember for this player, there's one player in particular, it was kind of right next to the rim. He was averaging like around 60%.
Yeah.
So it was excellent because it actually showed that, all right, what we're doing is, this is the right level of challenge. And then also for me, critically, just to watch it back, I remember I was watching certain stretches where he was getting like 8 out of 10. And I just knew then I had to make it harder and create a constraint where it was more challenging. So it's, I think, finding ways where you can kind of package this to front offices and help them understand the value of it. I think that helps a lot because, this stuff, it makes sense, but at the same time, it is very foreign to a front office. So just finding ways to explain it, I think could be useful.
Yeah, for sure. I think, demonstrating that and tracking practice, I think there's a lot of stuff to be. Yeah, that's the thing. One of the things, I've worked with a couple of NBA teams, and the first thing I notice when you go to practice is how amazing at the free throw. These guys hit 90% free throw 3-pointers in practice, sometimes 80, 90%. And then it falls to the game to, way lower than that. So you're like, okay, something's a little off here. And this was early in the season practice. So obviously it was just kind of messing around. But there's noticing things like that. So as basketball on pretty good. I guess it's always been fairly good in terms of small-sided games, but there's still some things that are still a bit old school, a bit unecological that we have to get rid of them, like doing the 3-man weave and, unopposed shooting drills. And there's still, the shot guru is still big in in working on shot technique. I noticed is still very popular in sports. So there are a lot of things you got to fight against still, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's a very fair assessment. I think I'm delighted to see that more coaches are using games-based approaches, but at the same time, I really am hoping that they go and navigate towards the CLA or just have an awareness of the difference because I'd say the most frequented feedback that we get at Transforming, which I'm sure like you and many others in the field have had, is that people are saying we've basically just doing what's already been done for 30 years. And coaches in basketball have been using small-sided games for decades. But it's always these small-sided games have often been identical and also with the exact same constraints every time. So they're not developing attunement to new affordances or getting just players exploring different movement solutions. And also they're often done kind of as a progression where they've done technical kind of isolated practice, lots of repetition, and then they go to the small-sided game and the coach is, basically saying, even if they don't say it, they are basically implying that they want the players to use the techniques that they've just taught them. And that's, I think the hardest thing is just convincing coaches, whether they're NBA coaches or working with beginners, that we don't need to do any of those fundamentals, any of the on-air things. And I think I was actually having a conversation this morning with a coach about it. I think a lot of the time when coaches say that they need to do those fundamental drills, it's simply because they haven't found a way to simplify the task or be creative enough of a constraint. And even like with beginners, playing defense with one hand, constrain the number of steps they can take where they're playing defense. Maybe something I do is often have them play defense holding a basketball. And there's just so many creative things we can do to reduce the challenge point where we're still, as you say, keeping perception action coupled.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is more of a principled way. I saw a lot of times I saw a constraint like where they would add a constraint like let's reduce the shot clock in a kind of a small segment. But it wasn't, I would ask, why? What are you trying to achieve there? And it was kind of not clear. Not that, just randomly manipulating constraints is probably better than what most is being done, but it's nice, what are you trying to work on early offense? And that's what I was trying to sell the teams I work with. It was kind of really early in the preseason, so the players wanted just to play pickup games a lot at the end of practice because it was kind of what they were doing there. I was like, can we add a constraint that's consistent with what you want to work on? You want to work on early offense. Okay, how can we add something to the pickup game that's going to encourage that? Yeah.
That's it, Rob. I'd say the biggest kind of feedback I get from NBA coaches or front office personnel is while the risk of going live. And the thing I always say is, well, we don't actually have to do anything extra. We can just make the moments they do go live in practice, especially in season, if they're going to do something like a scrimmage for 5 minutes or whatever, well, let's just make it more intentional, as you just said, and actually link it to principles of play. And often what you see a lot of is playing against coaches in the NBA. And I think that's fine because I get the injury risk, and you can also have a lot of coaching staffs will be former players.
Yeah, they're really good. Yeah, I noticed that too.
Representative. But the biggest thing, Rob, is that constraints aren't being used in that. So you often see the players, it's always very easy for them, and it's not that unpredictable. It's pretty kind of predetermined.
Yeah.
So we can just make some really small changes to what's already being done, and I think the results will be huge.
Yeah. I was also trying to like, not everything has to be completely alive and open. Like if you want to work on pick and roll defense or whatever, you can start it scripted like that, then let it go alive at the end.
That's it.
Like let them finish. But you can start in the position so they're going to get lots of reps of this particular situation. To me, that's effective. That's still representative of design.
That's it. Because like on a finishing example, something I might do is, because the coaches wanted to see certain coverage solutions on offense, which is just a way you might beat a particular type of defense on a pick and roll. So kind of you might script something like a reject, but then the finish is live. So how they self-organize, how they actually perceive the affordance to finish at the rim, obviously that's not predetermined. So I think that's a really easy way you can kind of integrate this into professional settings.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's a lot of so creative ways. That's what I like about it. It's a lot of fun.
And the thing too, Rob, on that is I think you start to see, just from my perspective, the players buy into this a lot. And people always are concerned about the perspective of the players doing this, I think, in professional sports. But the thing is, at least from my personal experiences, players gravitate towards this because what would they prefer to do? Like play or do sterile drills?
Yeah.
And I noticed a lot, like I had this concept of Maya I got from the Skillac Island guys, most advanced yet acceptable. And so I started with very small changes at the beginning. And then as the season went on, I was able to do more unorthodox things. And some players who were really comfortable with it and completely bought in. Like I had one player doing like extreme variations of DL where we would be using size 5, size 6, size 7, size 8 balls, would be changing the rim every 2 minutes. He'd be doing all these weird and wacky stances, movements. And other players, it could just be as simple as using an external focus of attention where they're aiming for brads on shots. And instead of spot shooting, I just pass differently and close out.
Yeah.
So I think it's really just about knowing your personnel, what you can do, what you can't, and just being creative from that moment on. Yeah,
for sure. And I think you've come across it, you hit it on a few times here already, a key difference between how it's done in the past, the individualization, right, of the constraints, right? It's kind of like a dirty secret. I say, like, you have to, in order for practice to be effective, you have to individualize it. Not everybody has the same rate limiters, the same issues.
That's it.
And somehow you can't, I know it's challenging when you're working with a group or a team, but yeah, that's really a critical part of this.
Practically, Rob, I mean, for any practitioners listening to this, I learned a lot on this working with my friend, Adam Omachinsky. He coached me in Italy, and what we started doing is once we had the PDPs made, we had a one-page summary where we had every player's name and then their rate limiters. And his whole job in practice was to go around and individualize task constraints wherever it made sense.
Yeah.
So I think this is where, and obviously I can't wait to read your book on this, but this is where the CLA, it obviously it goes far deeper than just practice. You can use it to actually develop your coaches. And I call it go from a trend, like positioning from a coaching staff to a coaching system. And just where every coach in a practice has a really specific intention. And I think that's a great way to do it, where one coach is just assigned to that. One coach is maybe officiating particular constraints. One coach could be focused just on feedback, and you have, some external cues or just feedback questions you want to ask. And I think that allows you to have such a specific practice, because what I see a lot of is high levels of like just very general, generic practices where coaches are just kind of saying good job, or they don't really know what their job is.
Yeah, and there's there's also the tendency where I find when people start using this approach that they just design something and then stand back and don't ever come in. We don't want that either. Yeah, we don't want that either, right? There's, we want you to kind of do the phrase guiding self-organization is what the phrase I'm using now. Like, we don't want to just let you self-organize completely on your own. We guide it both by the design of the drills, but also what we do after. Yeah. But that's cool. So in transforming basketball, you've started a podcast. How long has it been going on?
Oh, so that launched in September, Rob. And
Okay.
I mean, it's so fun, obviously, having guests on like yourself, but I learn a lot doing every podcast episode. That's the best part of doing a podcast. And I think too, Rob, we're just trying to be very authentic with what we share.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the content, it's really like what I learn. And I think what I'm going to start doing too is actually showing things that I've learned that I didn't do well along the way, or even activities maybe I was doing early on, which I would never do now and I'd be embarrassed about. But I think it actually be useful for coaches to see that. So, I mean, we've obviously very much focused on basketball coaches, but also practitioners and other roles in basketball, whether they're an athletic performance coach, whatever it is they do, and just really showing individuals how an ecological framework can be used to like create a very unified approach, regardless of whether you're coaching an NBA team or a high school team, just showing how these ideas can impact every field.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like it. It's a journey we're all on and kind of sharing. I think that's really, really valuable for people, because I get a lot of people, saying that I just started and I don't know what to do. I've made a lot of mistakes. We all have, that's part of the process, right? Learning what does, and there's a lot of, learning what does and doesn't work for you. And so I think that's great.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sharing experiences. And one thing I like how open, well, I think a lot of sports science coaching in the recent years has become, no one's really hiding and finding a method and keeping it to themselves. People are more open, which is really great, I think, about things.
That's it.
And then you have a book that just came out this week, I think, a few days ago.
Correct. Yeah, just a few days ago. Yeah.
So is it fair, the constraints that approach to basketball, like a constraints that approach to basketball, probably more than just that, but that's the central theme.
So, that's the central theme. And really, as I said just before we started, you obviously referenced frequently throughout. and I think just at the end, I kind of, in the acknowledgements, I kind of acknowledged all the amazing researchers in this space who have really just inspired these ideas. And just I've been able to kind of take them, add my twist, and just really it's the practical application of this. And that's what we're really trying to show to coaches. So we've obviously got the first few chapters I've really just focused on understanding ecological dynamics. So starting with dynamical systems and eco-psych, but critically putting it all in basketball terms. So for instance, we introduce an affordance. It's like 4 pages of understanding how you would actually use that term in a basketball conversation, like within the context of basketball possessions. So I think the example I used was talking about 3 different NBA players. Say you have Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and they're all in possession of the ball at the top of the key, and maybe all their teammates are spaced in similar locations, and there's 7 seconds left. Well, they would all do very different things.
Yes.
So it's just trying to allow coaches to connect the dots a little bit. And one of the best things, especially my time in Italy, is I was able to develop a huge case library of just all videos of everything from me coaching a games, running halftime talks, trying to use an ecological language to like guide attention. So we've put a lot of links in that to the book. So the idea is that coaches or practitioners go through it practically. They got like QR links. We got some case studies in there from other coaches committed to using the CLA in basketball. So I just really hope that it can have a difference in just being able to make better sense of these ideas and overcome some of the hurdles that we spoke about at the start of this episode.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's great. I think to really apply, you need to, in the context to understand the sport, really you need good knowledge of the sport itself. I think to do it. And I think, so I guess the terminology and language is important to you, like using the terms of affordances and constraints.
Yeah, it's very important. I didn't want to dumb it down. And I know a lot of coaches kind of find it, I don't understand why we're using these terms, but obviously there are some terms that literally you don't have a word for them in the dictionary. And, I think it's important that they see the origins of where this came from.
Yeah.
And the really, I'd say, the very rigorous theoretical framework of ecological dynamics that exists. And I do think too, when you understand it, it just changes everything.
For
And
sure.
I say, like, imagine if you were working in a team and you could have multiple practitioners use the word affordance and actually know what that means, or rate limiter.
Yeah.
It could just take what you're able to do to a whole new level. And that's why I think it's important. So yes, we want to be practical, but at the same time, we don't want to dumb the theory down.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what it was a careful balance, but I hope at least I achieved
Yeah.
that.
I think it's a tough, you don't want to overwhelm people, but yeah, I found the same, I've really pushed the like constraint, like when people use it, I always get super excited and applaud them. But using it correctly, kind of you understand what you put it in there for, right? What its purpose is, if you call it a constraint. Yeah, I think it's very important. It sounds like just another term, but it's important, I think. Yeah.
And on that note, Rob, I think something I often say to coaches is kind of, and maybe when they're understanding some of this, they say, oh, I've been using constraints for a while. And yeah, of course, we all have been. But the biggest thing is now we just want to ramp up the intentionality of why you're using it, how you're using it, and doing this more as opposed to all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So that's something I think we spoke about this maybe when you came on the Transforming Pod, just trying to take things that coaches are doing already. So in the NBA, that would be things like maybe like a shell drill, or like things which are very common, and then things which are more aligned with the CLA, and then just showing how we can take the more traditional activities and just change them with like one or two constraints, and then the things they're doing already well, and just ramp it up more, give them more ideas. And I think that's often a nice bridge to get coaches exploring this and interested.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially to meeting them halfway, you kind of have to. Yeah, I think it's so easy to do a lot of the traditional practice activities and just push them a little bit. Yeah, along with doing something completely different. But yeah, I think that's great. I think, and you had a few people write little parts for the book. Is that correct? Yeah,
exactly. So we mostly focused on basketball practitioners for this one.
Okay.
At different levels of the game. So from working, I've got some good case studies with coaches committed to the CLA with beginners, high school aged, MBA, and college. Because I really wanted to just show coaches how this isn't, you can do this, just a little bit of, learning and then commitment to apply it, and you're really not going to be that far off. So I really wanted to show that there's a lot of space and a lot of progress that's been made in the last 2 years. And hopefully this will just create more of a snowball effect and lead to more.
Yeah.
And then one of my favorite chapters was the Vision of the Future chapter. And that was where I took kind of I showed like my vision for more of a unified organizational model, which is underpinned by an ecological framework. So really, I invited practitioners in each field, from front office to coaching to Sean and Tyler wrote the role of a skill act specialist. I even had a nutritionist who I've been working with here in the UK, where he's using the CLA in nutrition, mental skills, mindfulness, and just showing how you can apply this in everything. And that was really one of my favorite parts of the book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So, and then, just linking to, all the great resources out there already from people in the ecological space. And I think it's really important for coaches to learn from as many different kind of resources they can, because I just think it helps them connect this in a better way, as opposed to like coaches only maybe listening to the Transforming Pod. We actively kind of encourage them to go and look at all the great work in other sports, other coaches, because I just think it helps apply this and make some light bulbs go off.
Yeah, for sure. I always say this, I think even if you're not in basketball, I think it's great to read and see examples of this.
Definitely.
Is there a kind of, what are the kind of the biggest hurdles you've seen in kind of going in this direction for coaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I actually started the first chapter talking about path dependency.
Okay.
And, forms of like social cultural constraints, why kind of the dominant, I actually called it the dominant approach instead of a traditional approach, because I didn't want to create like this unnecessary tension. So I looked a little bit at that, and I actually identified a whole kind of plethora of different reasons that we're in the state we're in. I'm just hoping that coaches are more intentional and self-aware of some of these things and how we might start to think differently. I think one of the biggest ones, Rob, is just the lack of time that unfortunately a lot of coaches have in professional and collegiate settings. And unfortunately, I think a lot of time is allocated to things that I don't want to say are unnecessary, but I think that even if let me give you an example. If coaches took 10% of the time that they put doing video, because coaches work really hard, and they're putting in the hours. But I actually think if front offices were open to them working a little less, it would give them more time to be creative and changing what they did. Maybe even just having kind of internal discussions where you're maybe reading one paper every 2 weeks, or you're just having a brainstorm about best practice ideas within the organization. Just thinking a little bit differently, I think would pay huge dividends.
For sure.
But obviously this requires a whole organization to be very intentional. And I don't think, Rob, as basketball teams try and go down this route, hiring one coach who does this, I don't think is the solution.
No. Yeah.
It's just, you have to be so intentional with actually how you do this. And I think having that level of intentionality from the front office, having an actual strategy in place, trying to hire not just one, but maybe a couple coaches, having a skill act specialist or a director of methodology, Martin Rothwell's work and Sam Sheffield Howland, they've inspired me a lot there. So I think it's kind of like there are different levels to doing this. And I think just having one coach is literally 5% of the equation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that you need that consistency of approach, whether, even something like we're going to reduce the amount of technical coaching we do. That's something we want to achieve as an organization. So have that come across, and it kind of comes in everything. That's what I find. That's what I think I said in that episode. I feel like I'm like the connective tissue between different because I look at everything through that lens of,
That's it.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I agree. If you really, you need a philosophy or whatever you want to call it, right? How you think, what you believe in people, how we're going to get people better, and that applies to everything. I think
practically, it's nice to kind of links back to what we spoke about earlier. I think if you have principles of play set, it makes everything clearer, because each field, they kind of know, they might have more specific guidelines as to what the head coach is looking for. And then of course, I would even say if you don't have PDPs, I don't know how you can really create something very effective, because you're probably just resorting to a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, that's a player development plan.
Yeah,
we have them too, but I wanted just in case.
People, exactly. Yeah. So I really do think just actually having very accurate, well-designed PDPs and making sure you have processes and checklists for bringing them to life. That to me is maybe the easiest way to start really doing this in an NBA team or another sport. And then I think obviously there are so many levels to that, then it goes so much deeper, but that's probably the first big commitment to really do this properly.
I think so. And then linking it to practice in a very deliberate way, like that's for me a big, like there is a time and place for unopposed jump shots, right? They make a player get right before the game, they make you feel confident, but we have to know that's what we're trying to achieve with that practice, right? We're not trying to improve your shooting, 3-point shooting when we do that, because it's not representative enough. It's not going to help, or rebounding or whatever it is, right? So it's knowing and identifying what the purpose of each practice, and then you'll see, whoa, we do way too much of that. Probably, yeah.
Exactly.
If you do that, yeah.
One suggestion I actually gave this year was in a practice plan template. This is very practical. This is me. I just got practical ideas.
Yeah, no, that's good.
It's just have an actual column on your practice plan with the intention of any activity you have.
100%.
And I think that would just pay huge dividends, because coaches would think more, why are we actually doing this? And I think what we see a lot at all levels of the NBA is we often have, this isn't a knock on anyone, but it's just we kind of recycle the same drills over and over. And we approach the practice through the lens of, all right, what drill are we going to do today, as opposed to what problem do we want the players to solve? What principle of play needs to be more coherent? What rate, So if we actually approached it through this lens, then practice immediately would be far more specific. And we could kind of create new activities entirely as opposed to just recycling old ones.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that kind of the team practice
Yeah,
side of it.
I see that
Yeah.
too. Just, putting drills instead of, I used to do when I coached tennis, I would do this, I call it the Craig Morris model. I would have no plan at all. And I would
I
let them
love it.
play for the
Yeah.
first bit. And I noticed, okay, everybody's missing serves. Okay, let's work on serving today, right? Let's do some activity or whatever it was, kind of, and yeah, connecting it with what you saw on the night before. There are lots of opportunities for that. Yeah. I think that's a
it.
great way
I
to
need
think.
you reminded me, bro. I need to go and see Craig in action when I'm still in London.
Oh, yeah.
That's good.
Uh-huh. Yep. See, you
That's a great
prepared. Well, it's
reminder.
Craig's face. Prepared, but not planned. I like
That's
that. Yeah.
it.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, being open, but that's a bit of a hard sell too. But I agree.
Oh, it's very hard.
What do we want to work on instead of what are we gonna do? Like
Yeah.
go that direction instead of yeah.
And it just like you reminded me of that, Rob. Just like even Craig talks about what being prepared for always like not having an answer and just being okay with the unknown, right? And often what you see a lot is, front offices courtside in the practice. So imagine what it would take for a coach to say, I don't know, explore for me, right? You would have to be, I've done that this season, but I'm confident because of the framework's given me confidence because I know I'm applying it. But I think a lot of times as coaches, we feel compelled when there's someone sitting there who's like a very senior person, we feel like we have to we have to show our knowledge about.
Yeah.
And the most speaking for like 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, giving the players all this information, showing this knowledge off. Well, really, it's not about that. It's about the embodied knowledge of and what they're actually doing within the activity and what's emerging. And I think that's a big thing because practice is not a coaching clinic. And often at the highest level, it's just so much information is given to the players. And actually the most surprising one, Rob, is probably the shoot around, like the day of the game, where for me, I think it's actually, I'd say maybe damaging because of all the information. And just think about how maybe stressful it is if you're receiving all this new information the day of a game.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's beneficial for learning. So I think and that's where like just even understanding the difference between knowledge about and knowledge of would be huge in an NBA setting.
For sure. And are you talking about knowledge, but information about the opponent you're gonna play that night? Or? Yeah.
I'd say specifically that and like the scout report.
Yeah.
And it's
same. I see the same.
Yeah. And it's so easy to put that stuff into small-sided games against coaches during the course of a couple of days or pre-game or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. That's the missing piece for me. What do we do? What approach are we going to take based on that information? And let's practice that, implementing that approach, right? Whether it's taking away threes, running out because this team shoots a lot of threes or whatever it is. We need to practice implementing that instead of just reading about it and hoping it connects. Yeah,
exactly right. For me, it's three things. I think it's the first one is the huge silo between the scout report and the team practice, and this is all levels, college, youth too. Then it's the silo between actually the performance analysis and the scouting.
Yeah,
and then the last one is the game coaching and the scouting. So, like, let me start with the video piece first, if that's cool. Like, this is great.
Yeah.
Just like. So it's you have to have like really specific intentions in the video, and if you have really generic keys, which we see a lot of in basketball, like don't turn the ball over or play fast or rebound the ball, it's white noise and the players don't even listen, and it's not specific enough, so it's really a waste of time. Whereas if you have like two really specific things that you want to focus on, it just changes the whole video session completely. And if you just start asking them questions, it's short, it's punchy, it's not 40 minutes. You have the lights on, you're not sitting in a theater with no lights, no windows. Maybe you do it on court, then you create a small-sided game with good constraints where they actually do that. So then that covers, those two silos. And then the last one is reinforcing it through feedback in the game.
Yeah.
And that's where, short phrases using timeouts, the off game, just questions. You can do all of this and really bring the scout to life effectively. And I think that's where the CLA is so compelling as a framework.
Yeah. No, I agree. We can make a lot of mileage there
Yeah.
connecting that information. It's too much. I find and not
Yeah.
implement. Like not, you're right. It's knowledge. It's the classic knowledge about knowledge of,
That's
right? Player.
exactly.
We assume the players can put it into knowledge of, but we don't really give them many opportunities to do that. Yeah.
I mean, I would love Rob just to see kind of asking players. I actually did this after every time I presented a scout or something this year. I just asked the players what they remembered. I mean, we
Mm,
did loads of quizzes throughout,
yeah.
and I tried to make it funny with like jokes and stuff. But just just asking them what they're and sure enough, at the start when I did it, like very few because it wasn't their fault, but they weren't used to actually like being quizzed and asked.
Yeah.
And they did an amazing job. Like what they're able to articulate as we went on was awesome. And the other coaches did a great job doing it too. And I think just small things like that just really bring it to life.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great idea. I think that's something I've been trying to do as well. Make better use of that because it is very useful information. It's just not put at the level of usable. Oftentimes, it's just here it is, all of it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
but,
Rob, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. Just I know we're riffing,
sure.
and I'm really
Yeah.
enjoying this. The biggest kind of thing you asked me a while ago about barriers to this, and I think number one is I think some more empirical research showing the benefits of CLA, DL with especially not just in the basketball scene but other sports too. But I'd actually, if anyone's listening to this, I'm really keen to actually try and do like provide some of the small sided games and just DL activities I've come up with, and just see if they can actually be put into research. And especially, I'm really intrigued on the shooting piece and seeing how you could integrate this with, a biomechanics team, looking at attractors, fluctuators, but then using contemporary methods as opposed to, you're going to put your elbow here, arm here because it's an optimal movement. So that Rob is probably the thing I want to kind of learn about next season. That's my goal. But I'd be curious to just
doing the research side of it or integrating that,
like integrating and figuring out how to even go about it.
Yeah. The research side is really challenging because a lot of the things we've talked about today, individualizing are not way typically do research, right? I think case study model is the perfect. Yeah. Because putting 10 players in a CLA group and giving them all the same constraint completely completely shoots down everything we already talked about, right?
Exactly.
I think I think changing the way, I like the way some of the stuff Keith's done and where you kind of look more of an individual level and things. But I think finding that right balance for research. I think and in terms of integrating using the like biomechanics stuff and things, I think there's some interesting things you can do there, but it's kind of the same. You have to look at it through the lens of I always want to distill it down into simple, what I try to preach is let the coaches worry about that, and through the practice design, it's going to get to the players. I don't want the player. We give that information to the players sometimes, but it scares me them thinking about how high is my elbow when I'm shooting. Like that's we know there's so much research showing that's terrible. Right? Let the coaches worry about that through their design.
I think too. Like I think there's a lot of value in using DL, especially with suboptimal shooters.
Yeah,
and for me anyway, I think if you could work with a biomechanist and just have it more strategic, the DL, where you're actually knowing kind of what you're trying to perturb or it's more strategic variability, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd be really intrigued to see like what I could learn and get better at there.
Yeah, no, that's that phrase. I call it focus variability instead of just broad.
Okay.
We're going to focus it around what you need to work on and stuff. Yeah, I'd love to see a study where they actually measure stuff during the drill. So they actually measure mechanics during differential learning. How does it change? How is it doing what we think it is? Is it changing in a way? There's been some studies showing more exploration and things, more variability, but I think we could do with more of that. So yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I think that we're getting there, but yeah, there's a lot of things like trying to demonstrate some of these benefits and convince people, on an individual level. So, but well, Cool. Thanks, Alex. I really enjoyed this discussion. And where can people find your stuff before I?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the website's just transformingpeople.com.
Okay.
I've got personal and we got obviously company pages on social media, like all the big networks, and then just the book is on Amazon, Kindle and print versions. So yeah, I mean, thanks, Rob, just for everything you do.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. You've really inspired us at Transforming, and yeah, just a real honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, thanks for joining me, Alex. And yeah, everyone go out and get the book. It's a nice new addition to I think this focused on basketball, which I know I get a lot of questions about. So there's your answers. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Alex.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWaves. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including a monthly coaches meetup, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep 'em coupled. Gone through St. Louis.